In this video, we're going to talk about logging your BMW. This worked for all the major tuning platforms, so boot mode, MHD, JB4, any of them that comes with logging capabilities. Some of them have the actual logging included with the purchase, and others require it as a separate purchase. But as long as it has the capability to do logging and you have that in your bundle, this will apply to you. Some of the things that I'm going to mention are kind of nuances for later model engines with the electronic wastegates. So the later N55s, the B48, B58, etc. But the overall concept applies to all turbo BMWs. Also, I have a lot of questions from people asking me to review their logs, and I can definitely do that. Send me a message to my Instagram. The link is in the description, and I'll take a look at it when I can and respond to you with anything that I think could be an issue, or if I think everything's good. You don't need to follow me or 100 pictures in a row or something to get my attention. Just send me a message and I'll see it in my request. That being said, if I do respond with something that I think could potentially be an issue, or you see something in this video that matches a symptom of something you're seeing, that doesn't mean that I'm telling you to go back to your tuner and say, hey, these numbers look off. This is an issue, fix my tune. 9 times out of 10, if you're working with a reputable tuner, they're setting things up that you won't even be able to see in your logs. They have tables and parameters that they can see that we can't. So just trust that every tuner will have a different tuning strategy. Everybody will have something different that they think is safe and makes the most power. So just let them do their job. So the first thing we want to talk about is how to do a log. The concept is pretty simple, but some people struggle with it because it does require getting up to a high speed. So the easiest way to do it is to pick a gear that's appropriate for you. If you have a manual transmission, it's probably 4th gear, or in an automatic, it's 5th gear. You're going to start between 2,000 RPM and 2,500 RPM and floor it, go wide open throttle all the way to redline. It's pretty much the same strategy as what you'd see somebody do if they were doing a dyno pull. And in the same sense, if you're doing dyno runs, you can log and you'll get the same kind of data. Now, if you want even more data, you can include a shift. So start a gear lower. Again, in a manual, you'd start in 3rd gear, or in an automatic, you'd start in 4th or 5th. And same thing, start at 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, floor it to redline, shift to the next gear, and then run it out again. That gives you the added benefit of getting additional data from after you shift. So if there's something weird that's happening when you shift, if it's bogging or cutting power or whatever, it'll give you visibility to that so a tuner can make adjustments there as well. The reason why you need to do it in a gear that's so tall and gets you to such a high speed is because you want to gather as much data as possible. Your logging software has a specific sample rate. The longer your pull is, the more data it'll get, because it's literally going to the top of your list, taking a measurement for each parameter, and then going back to the top of the list again. But if your pull lasts twice as long, you'll have twice as much data throughout that pull. And it just gives you more discrete data throughout the pull so that you can make better adjustments or have a better opportunity of catching a potential issue that's happening. I'll put a list of the parameters that I suggest including in the description. Not all logging software will have all of the parameters, and some logging parameters will be named differently depending on the tuner that you're using. But just look for something that matches that description and make sure that you have those included as a bare minimum. There are a lot of options available, especially again on later model cars that have the additional RAM channels and things like that. But again, the more data that you try to collect at once, the less discrete the data will be as you're going through the pull. So like I said, if you have 20 data points selected instead of 10, you'll have half as much data throughout the pool. So try to just select the ones that you need, and that'll make sure you get as much data as possible. The main thing you'll see in the logging parameters is that everything that has a target and actual has both selected, and that's going to be key to reading your logs in the future. You have to be able to see what the DME is asking for and then what the car is actually doing. So anytime you have both, definitely select both. That being said, you can easily get to 120 to 140 miles an hour doing a pull in that high of a gear. So if you're not comfortable doing that, you can try to do it in a lower gear and just try to make the best of it. But the longer the gear is, the higher the speed it gets to, the more data you'll get. But make sure you don't do it in too high of a gear where it's past the 1-to-1 ratio. So Like on the manual, don't go above 5th gear, and on the ZF8, don't go above 6th gear when you're doing a logging pull. A lot of people also ask me when they need to do a log, or how they know they need to do a log, or why can't they just trust that, the tune that they're running is doing what it's supposed to do. I like to do my due diligence. I like to make sure I know how my car is running, and so I kind of go above and beyond just from my understanding. It's kind of just up to you based on how much information you want to know and how well you want to understand how your car is running. The first thing I usually recommend to people is, if you have the patience after you've unlocked your DME, is to go ahead and log the car in completely stock form. Take an extra day or whatever before you flash your map and just see what the OEM calibration is doing. And I think that answers a lot of questions and dispels a lot of myths when you see how the car is running direct from BMW. That'll help you actually see what's being adjusted when you log an off-the-shelf map or a custom map in the future. So the next thing, and what most people are concerned with, is logging after you flash an off-the-shelf map. So go ahead and drive the car for like 1 or 2 days, put like 50 miles on it so that it can kind of calibrate, and then go ahead and do a log. And that'll give you a good idea if your fuel quality is up to par, if your spark plugs and everything are operating as well as they should be, and just making sure that your car is safe to run that tune. There's going to be a lot of noise in it because it's an off-the-shelf map, so it's designed for all cars across multiple environments, multiple fuel qualities, everything. So it's very rare for a car to have a completely perfect log on an off-the-shelf map, but you can still see that it's safe and that your car is running well, or it might tell you an indicator of what you can do to help maximize the performance and maybe make an adjustment. And then finally, one that's a little less common but more critical is if you decide to get a custom tune. So for people getting bigger turbos or running different ethanol blends, if you want to get a custom tune, you have to be able to log your car. That's the way that the tuner is going to be able to review how it's running and make adjustments, either to make it safer, more powerful, or both. Now, like I said, this is the same way that you're doing a dyno pull. So even if you don't want to do pulls on the highway and potentially get a ticket from getting up to high speeds, you can go to a dyno, get a dyno tune, log it while it's on the dyno using the same strategy, and you'll get the same data to your tuner, and they can make the tune that way. So it just kind of depends on your needs and how comfortable you are with it. Usually it's better to log it on the street just because it's a better environment and replication of what you're actually experiencing when you drive the car. But a properly loaded and calibrated dyno can help you get a very good tune as well. Then after that, I recommend logging every couple weeks. When I first flashed my car 2 years ago, we had just gotten our DMEs unlocked and we had just gotten our flash tunes set up. And I completely trust our tuners, but just to make sure my car was running it well and my fuel quality and everything was up to par, I was logging it like every 2 or 3 weeks. Once I got more comfortable with it and I saw it was running well, I was logging maybe once a month, once every 2 months. And if I switched maps, I went back to logging it more frequently again until I got more comfortable and knew that the car was handling it well. So again, it's kind of up to you, your comfort level, how much time you have on your hands. But these are the things that you can do and just get more data on your car so that you know that you're not having an issue. The big benefit of this is in the future, if you do start having an issue, your car feels slower or it starts having a hiccup or anything like that, you can run a log again and you can compare it to your old logs to see if something changed. And that's really the biggest benefit, is that you can use logging to help diagnose if there's an issue. So the more baseline data you have, the better. Now, one more disclaimer: you are putting your car under a very big load when you do a log. You're going wide open throttle for an extended period of time. If your car is doing something that could potentially be dangerous to the engine, like having really violent misfires, backfires, etc., you don't necessarily need to log the car to make sure it's running well. Always scan for codes first. Even if you don't have a check engine light or drivetrain malfunction, just see if there's anything in there, potentially shadow codes that could help indicate what the issue is, because you probably don't want to put it under a high load scenario if that could potentially damage the engine. All right, now, so the meat of the video, and I think what most people are curious about, is how to read your logs and what to look for. So after you've gone through and done your log, it should save it to your phone or to an application, and you're going to go ahead and download that CSV. And that's going to be uploaded to a website called DataZap. And DataZap is a really good tool to help you view logs, and it's just a really easy way to share it with people and things like that. but it plots everything. It allows you to turn parameters on and off as you need them. So it's a really useful tool and completely free. So I highly recommend go on there, make an account, and start uploading your logs there so that you have them for future reference. Some tuners have integrated logging viewers inside of them, but it kind of just depends on your preference because it can be hard to share it, or sometimes it's not saved depending on what happens to your account. So DataZap's just a nice way for it to be like universally shared and stored. The only issue with DataZap is it's a little bit finicky to use on your phone because when you're tapping around and stuff, it can kind of make unexpected changes. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of dependent on who you're sharing it with and how you're going to view it. Once you upload it to DataZap, you've got all the parameters that you want in there and you've got a good clean log. You're going to isolate the area where you're full throttle so that you can ignore the rest of the data. And we're going to begin pulling out specific parameters that we want to focus on. So the way I like to do it is to go through the 3 different things that make your engine run: air, fuel, and ignition. So we'll start with air because that's what a lot of people are mostly concerned with, since that deals with, your turbo and how well the car is breathing. So get everything out of the way and you're going to look at boost target and boost actual. And the boost target is going to tell you what the DME is asking for. And I'm going to probably repeat this several times, but you should understand the primary goal is for the target and actual to be as close as possible. Now, on a lot of cars, there are actually 2 pressure sensors, and people have asked me which one to look at. The best one to look at is your map sensor. So on the B58, that's up here, and that's basically giving you the best indicator for how much pressure is actually being seen by the engine. There's also a pre-throttle sensor that we have down here, but the issue with that is it's not representative of the actual boost pressure that you're seeing. Especially in our case, it's before the intercooler, so there's some pressure drop potentially, and the electronic throttle movement can actually create a difference in pressure that you see before and after the throttle body. So focus on the actual manifold pressure, but I usually put both in my log just so I can see what's happening both before and after. Down low, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the turbo to spool, so your target might say 15 psi, but it takes a little bit for the turbo to get up to that psi. That's completely normal. And then when you go to the top end, especially on a higher power tune, your turbo might fall out of boost, and that just means that it can't hold that much boost pressure up top. So again, that's normal. You want to be able to just see that throughout the rev range it's following boost, the boost curve is smooth, and that it's not doing anything wonky or unexpected. You can also check the wastegate duty cycle, and what that's going to tell you is how hard the car is working to maintain the boost level that it's at. So looking down here at the turbo, what you see down here is the wastegate arm. This is our electronic wastegate, and it pushes that arm in and out to control how much boost pressure is being released from the turbo. When you look at your wastegate duty cycle, 0 means that the wastegate is completely open and just bleeding off pressure. 100% means the wastegate is slammed shut and building up as much pressure as possible. Usually you'll see wastegate duty cycle go to 100 initially to help boost build as quickly as possible, and then it'll begin to reduce a little bit so that it can hold a set boost pressure while you're going through the rev range. This can be a good indicator of if you have a boost leak or not, because if wastegate duty cycle is stuck at a really high, 95, 100%, but the turbo isn't hitting boost, you're like 5-10 psi low, then you most likely have a boost leak that's preventing the turbo from hitting the desired boost. You also could potentially have an issue with the wastegate, or it could be something in the tune. But if you ever had a point where it was hitting the target boost, check for leaks first, do a smoke test, see if there's any clamps or anything that's leaking air. Next, we'll look at accelerator position and throttle position. Accelerator position represents the target, and then throttle position represents the actual. So when you pin the throttle down and you have your pedal all the way to the floor, your throttle should follow that as closely as possible. The thing about it is our throttle body is electronically controlled. There's nothing physically connecting the throttle body and the accelerator pedal. So the sensitivity between the two is controlled by the DME. And you can feel that when you go from comfort mode to sport mode, the sensitivity of the pedal is increased significantly. So a small touch of the pedal creates a lot of thrust because the throttle position opens a lot faster. Also, a lot of cars have an additional boost control built into the throttle position. So what you'll see sometimes is that the accelerator pedal position is at 100% because you're wide open throttle, but the throttle position changes. And that's going to vary depending on the situation that's going on with the car. Primarily, we experience what people call a throttle closure, where the pedal is pinned, but the throttle closes and then opens back up. Usually that's because you're having an overboost scenario. So instead of struggling to hit your target boost, you actually go over the target boost. And in order to protect the engine, the car closes the throttle a little bit so that not as much air gets into the car until it's able to actually reduce the boost down back to the target pressure. Depending on the sensitivity, you can actually see these fluctuations really rapidly where the throttle is opening and closing and the boost control is trying to dial itself in. That's pretty common on tunes that are being dialed in for custom tunes. But once you get it actually to your final tune, that should go away. You should have a nice smooth boost onset. The downside is if a tune isn't very refined, you'll feel a big throttle closure. And what that feels like is the car is pulling really hard and then it kind of slows down and hesitates and starts pulling again. And you're literally feeling that throttle angle close slightly while boost reduces and then open back up when boost hits target. So this can happen a lot with like piggybacks or early revisions of off-the-shelf maps. But if you're one of the few people that still has it with a more refined off-the-shelf map, you can contact your tuner to see if there's anything they can do for you. But sometimes you'll just need a custom tune in order to get that perfectly dialed in. So the next thing we'll talk about is ignition, and that's primarily ignition timing. So again, get everything else out of the log except for your engine speed, and then put your ignition timing up there. No matter what, your ignition timing is going to increase as it goes towards redline, because as the engine speed increases, the rotating assembly and the piston movement increases as well. So you think at like 3,000 RPM, it's moving half as fast as it is at 6,000 RPM. And if it's moving twice as fast and coming up to top dead center twice as fast, you need to fire the spark plug twice as early to make sure that it's actually combusting at the right time. Now, there are a lot of other things that influence the actual ignition timing, like heat and boost pressure and things like that. But in a general concept, that's what you should be looking for. Now, sometimes you'll get what is called ignition pull. And what that is your ignition advanced too much or something in the DME sense that you couldn't run that much timing and it reduces it. And that'll be shown as like kind of a drop in ignition timing. If there's a lot of ignition timing drop, that's something that you probably want to investigate. And any time that you see more than like 3 degrees of ignition drop, it's probably something you want to investigate. A lot of times on off-the-shelf maps, you'll have some timing pull because, like I said, fuel qualities vary, environmental conditions vary. And if it actually catches up as you get towards redline, that's a good sign that it was just a fluke. You know, you just had like a small occurrence where timing needed to be pulled. And that's a factory thing in the DME used to protect the engine and help it run as efficiently as possible. So timing pull is not always an issue. It's mainly if you have a lot of timing pull, consistent timing pull, and if it can't recover by the time it gets towards redline. So if that timing curve starts looking flat, you know, it just holds like 4 degrees all the way to redline and it keeps pulling timing every time it tries to go above that, you probably have an issue with your fuel quality, or you could potentially just have old spark plugs that are preventing it from igniting efficiently. The next thing you'll look for is knock detection. The actual parameter in your log isn't necessarily the best way to look for it because it's a lot easier to see it just by looking for timing pull, since that's also caused by knock. But if you actually see knock detected in your logs, that can be an indicator if something is wrong. Again, if your fuel quality is bad or if your spark plugs are going bad. It's either a 0 or a 1. So 0 means when it went past that parameter and checked the condition, there was no knock detected. If you see a 1, that means when it went past that parameter, it did not see knock detected. But again, because of the sample rate, I wouldn't just focus on knock detected. It can be a good indicator, you know, just a good gut check, but that's not the only thing that you should focus on for knock. So finally, we'll talk about fueling. The most important factor dealing with fueling is your AFRs. And that's measuring the air-fuel mixture that's coming out of the combustion chamber. So you're going to look back here, basically this first sensor on my downpipe. That O2 sensor is reading my AFR readings. When you look at it in your logger, it's going to say either AFR or Lambda. We have an actual Lambda sensor on our cars, so it doesn't match the AFR scale exactly. It's basically going from 0 to 1. On pump gas, your stoichiometric ratio is about 14.7, so that's what you'd see typically when you're cruising. In a Lambda scale, that's a 1. The benefit of using a Lambda scale is when you're switching to E85, the actual stoichiometric ratio is a lot lower. It's like less than 10 to 1, but it's still 1 on the Lambda scale. So no matter what fuel you're running, the O2 sensor is able to control it efficiently because really it's just a ratio. So what most tuners do is take that Lambda reading and convert it to the AFR scale, since that's how most people understand it easily. However, once you start adding E85 and running like an E30, E50, whatever mix, that scale isn't accurate anymore. So you still can read it from an overall standpoint of if 12.5 AFR is safe on 93 octane, then seeing it in your log indicates you're still safe on your ethanol mix. But it's not going to be exactly 12.5 AFR. It's going to be lower than that. So again, like everything else, you're looking at target and actual. This is probably one of the leading parameters in your car to make sure it's running safe. So if you see this varying, that's 100% cause to stop the car and figure out what's wrong. Even if it's just a sensor that needs to be replaced because it's reading wrong, you're putting a significant risk on the car and potentially letting it do something extremely dangerous. So check your Lambda readings, check your AFRs, make sure those are hitting your actuals. The next thing we'd like to look at is the rail pressure. And what you're reading on the B58 is this sensor right here that's plugged into your fuel rail. All the other engines, it'll be the same. You'll have a sensor right off the rail that'll be telling you what the pressure is between your high pressure fuel pump and the injectors. So all of those hard lines are seeing, upwards of 1,000, 2,000. Even on the new B58s, it's upwards of 5,000 PSI. And that reading indicates whether you have enough pressure behind the injectors to safely push fuel into the combustion chamber. Like I mentioned in my fueling video, the combustion pressures can be extremely high. So you need that elevated fuel pressure in the fuel rail to compensate for it so that the fuel can spray and distribute evenly. So look at your targets, look at your actuals, and if you see any dips in the rail pressure, that can be a cause for concern. So to understand what this is actually reading, you can understand your high pressure fuel pump is creating pressure in the lines. Every time your injectors open and squirt some fuel in the combustion chamber, it's releasing some of that pressure. So your high pressure fuel pump is constantly pumping to recover all the lost pressure that's happening from the injectors. Now, if, for example, you add too much E85 to your ethanol mix, so for example, if you're running E40 on a tune that's designed for E30, the injectors could be opening for longer than they're expected to by the tune to make sure that they're hitting your AFR targets and squirting enough fuel in the combustion chamber. And when they're open for too long, the high pressure fuel pump isn't able to recover and you're losing too much pressure every time an injector opens. So that's where you see a situation where the rail pressure dips below your target pressure. And you don't want that to happen because that's something that can cause your car to misfire. It can cause the car to go lean and cause a lot of issues. So that's why you want to make sure you're getting your mix right and then check your logs to make sure that the rail pressure is holding as a good indicator that you got your mix right and it's dialed in for that tune. Another parameter you can look at is your low pressure fuel, and that's the fuel going from the fuel pump in the fuel tank and coming up to the high pressure fuel pump. So that soft line that runs underneath the car. That's going to be a lot lower, like on the B58, it's usually around 72 PSI. But again, if you don't have enough low pressure fuel supplying the high pressure fuel pump, then you'll have the same issue with your rail pressure dropping. So you have to make sure you have enough low pressure fuel just as much as you need to make sure you have enough high pressure fuel. It's a lot less of a concern on B58s, but if you're having an issue with your car not starting, for example, you can log your car and see if the fuel pressure is building up, because sometimes that could just mean that your low pressure fuel pump failed and you're not getting any pressure up to the fuel rail, so your car won't start. The last thing we're going to look at from a fueling perspective is fuel trims. The fuel trims illustrate how much of an adjustment the DME is making to inject the right amount of fuel into your car compared to the baseline fuel mapping that's in your tune. So if you see fuel trims go up, that means that it needs to inject more fuel than the baseline fuel maps. And if it goes down, that means that it's injecting less fuel than what the base fuel mapping is set for. Depending on your logging software, the fuel trim will be calculated on a different scale. Usually I see it where the perfect fuel trim is a 1.0, and that means you're injecting the exact amount of fuel that's demanded by your base fuel mapping. If it goes up to, for example, 1.1, then that means you're injecting 10% more fuel than the base fuel map demand. If it goes down to 0.8, that means you're injecting 80% of the fuel demand. Others have a different scale where they say like 0 is the perfect fuel demand, and if it goes up to 10, that's an extra 10% of fuel, and if it goes down to negative 20, that's 20% less fuel. When looking at fuel trims, you have two different ones, long-term and short-term, and they're exactly what they sound like. Short-term are kind of small, minuscule adjustments as you're driving the car. Long-term is kind of an overall running average to help reduce how much the DME needs to work adjusting short-term fuel trims. So you might have a long-term fuel trim of 1.05, but your short term is almost always 1. And that's because the long-term fuel trim is eating up majority of the compensation your DME needs to do. So it's doing the right thing. Typically you want to see those stay within a 10% deviation. So again, between 0.9 and 1.1 if you're on that scale, or between negative 10 and positive 10 if you're on that scale. That's just the DME doing its job. You know, if you fill up at different fuel stations or it starts getting hot or anything, it can cause some variation in fuel trim. So that's really nothing to be concerned about. However, if it's between 10 and 30%, especially on your long-term fuel trims, you'll want to investigate to make sure you're not having any fueling issues. You could potentially have a fuel leak or an issue with one of your injectors where the car feels like it needs to work harder to meet the fuel demand and keep your AFRs at a safe range. A lot of times you'll see this go crazy when people make changes to the car without adjusting the tune for it. So for example, if you add an intake or something that increases the spool time of the turbo on a tune that's not designed for it, you'll see some fuel trim variation because the turbo is spooling up quickly. So the car is seeing more boost sooner than it expects to in the base mapping. And if that's something that you did that you can pinpoint it to, then again, it's probably not a cause for concern, but you should at least be able to tie it into some change that you made on the car if that's what you're seeing. This can also be an indicator if you're running an ethanol blend that you have too much E85 or too little E85. So again, just make sure that you're getting your mixes right so that you can keep everything as close as possible to the baseline figures. If fuel trims go above a 30% deviation, they'll typically cause the car to go into a limp mode. You'll get like a check engine light or a drivetrain malfunction, and that usually means that you have a much bigger issue. So again, just check your fuel system, make sure that everything's running well, check your spark plug, see if there's any indication that you have a leaking injector or an injector that could be stuck closed or clogged, and make sure your fuel system is up to par. So that's really what I look for when I'm reading my logs. Hopefully this helps you guys understand what you're seeing. There's a lot of capability built into the DME to adjust for anything that's going on. So try not to focus on noise too much because you can go crazy chasing small things that really aren't an issue. Everything is designed for the car to help it be safe so that you're not, making adjustments every time the temperature changes or you go to a different fuel station or anything like that. The DME is designed to make these adjustments. You just don't want to lean on those adjustments when you're running your car. That's the reason why you can add an intake and a downpipe and an exhaust to your car without making any tuning changes, because the DME can automatically adjust. But the more you eat into that safety net, the less room you have when an actual issue comes up and you get bad gas or an injector fails or your spark plug or coil pack fails. So the closer you can get things to the baseline, the better. It'll just make the car run more smoothly and you'll have more protection in the case of something actually going wrong. So hopefully this helps. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Thanks.